Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Welcome to the February Computer Conservation Society talk. I'm doing the introduction honours today, as Roger has a bit of a sore throat. Our speaker today is Gareth Edwards. And some of you may remember that Gareth spoke to us last year on Lorry Harp and vectographic, which was a very interesting talk. And if you didn't see it, I strongly suggest checking it out on the YouTube channel that Computer Conservation Society runs. And today's talk is going to be entitled "The Man Who Beat IBM, How Compaq Saved the PC." Now, that sounds like it's also going to be pretty interesting. So Gareth is a digital strategist, writer, and historian. He's an avid collector of old computers, as you might imagine, rare books and interviews, and abandoned cats, apparently. And if you wish to do so, you can follow him on Mastodon or BlueSky. So now I hand over to Gareth. And could I just remind Bill to hit record for the... Oh, he has hit it, good.
Do the mic swap.
And then we'll mute that.
And there you go. I should just check. You should be able to hear me now. All coming through fine. Good stuff. Yeah, great to be here again. Thank you very much for inviting me back. So on September the 9th, 1988, Rod Canion, and you can see Rod Canion on the screen here, looking very happy behind a 386, was in a hotel room in New York, and his phone rang and he answered it. And the caller was a guy called Bill Lowe. And Bill Lowe was at the time one of the most powerful men in the computing industry because he was the head of IBM's entire PC business. Now, if IBM had spun off their PC business at this time, it would have instantly on its own been the third largest computer company in the world. That's how big their PC arm was. It dominated the industry. Now, Canion was the CEO and one of the founders of Compaq. And by 1988, Compaq were the biggest of the companies making what have become known as PC clones. So these are PCs that were designed to run the same software as the IBM PC. And as Canion listened, Lowe proceeded to make him an extraordinary offer. IBM were prepared to offer Compaq exclusive access to the new technology standard that IBM had launched to completely replace the PC. Lowe explained to Canion that IBM would license this technology to Compaq for a price significantly lower than they were offering all the other clone companies in the world. This would allow Compaq and only Compaq to continue to offer PC clones at a price that would match or be cheaper than the price of IBM's own machines. In effect, what Lowe was doing was he was offering to split the entire PC market in the world between the two firms at the exclusion of everyone else. IBM wanted just one thing from Compaq in return. They wanted Canion to cancel a press conference that he'd called in New York for later that week. Now, the offer's extraordinary. From a financial perspective, it would propel Compaq to being full equals with IBM in the PC market, a market IBM and Compaq could rule like they were the Eastern and Western emperors, really. From a purely business perspective, I think everyone online and in the room can agree that there is only one answer that Canion, as the CEO of Compaq, should give to Bill Lowe here. So type it in chat or shout it out now. What answer do you think Bill Lowe should give to that question? Yeah. Rod Canion says no. And for a second or two, there's silence on the other end of the line. Then Bill Lowe sighs and he says, "I think you're making a big mistake." And then he ends the call. 4 days later, Canion stepped up onto a New York stage and did something that the entire business world said you should never do. Compaq declared war on IBM. And this talk is about the founding of Compaq, the events that lead up to that, and what happens next. And to really understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. The man you've got on the screen there is Ed Roberts. He was the founder of a company called MITS. MITS made one of the first computers, it's the Altair. He's born in 1941. He grows up in a low-income family. He creates the Altair 8800. Fantastic machine. We'll get one up on screen because it's fun. And I'm in the kind of room where I can put that on screen and people actually care. Yeah, hands up everyone in the room who owned an Altair. There we go, we have at least one hand. Released in December 1974. What I like about this actually is this shows the Altair as most people had it. When you see it described, everyone talks about how, well, it's just a box with lights on the front. If you chatted to Ed Roberts, he'd get really annoyed about that because Ed would say, well, yes, it was a box with lights on the front, but you would actually hook it up half the time to a teletype next to it. So you were getting output. It wasn't just a box with lights. But it was a revolutionary machine. This is the first computer people could have at home. And I'm just going to come back to this slide with Ed Roberts on again, because I think this quote from Ed Roberts really sets the tone for what he saw and why he did it, which is, to some extent, your worth has always been measured by the number of people you control, the number of people you own. So by any historical definition, if you have a computer, you're wealthy. I mean, wealthy beyond all imagination. That's always what intrigued me about computers, the enormous amount of power that it gives us regular folks. That was why he did it. That's why he pivoted from calculators into computers. But the Altair has a ripple effect that spreads through the industry. I mean, if you saw my talk on Laurie Harp, you'd have known that that's one of the ways she gets into computers via her husband, Bob Harp. But what the Altair does is it inspires a generation of people to go out and found computer businesses to do things. And some of the names of the people that you inspire, you see up on there. And some of these names we're going to meet again. But Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs are the founders of Apple. Adam Osborne, we will encounter again in a minute. He creates one of the first portable computers. Lee Felsenstein is the guy who actually builds that computer for Adam Osborne. They're all in the room when the third ever Altair made is on a table in front of them at the Homebrew Computer Club in California. They're literally all in the room together. It's like the worst Avengers movie ever. More people get inspired. Bill Gates, Dr. Portia Isaacson, we'll encounter her in a minute. Chuck Peddle, who goes on to create a lot of the chips for Commodore machines. Bob Harp, and Don Estridge, and we'll encounter Don as well. In fact, we'll encounter Don now. Don is the man you can see on the far right of your screen. Adam is the guy in the top holding the teacup, looking very dapper, because Adam always did. That's Dr. Portia Isaacson down below. We're encountering her again in a minute. But to understand how Compaq exists, we have to understand why IBM enters this market. So IBM is a mainframe company. They like making big computers. They like charging big businesses an extortionate amount of money for very large computers. They like to take 12 years to build those computers and charge all of that back to the client, and then charge another 12 years of consultancy to actually get the computer working. That joke came to me from an IBM salesman, and I think it's reasonably accurate as a description of IBM's business operations at the time. But they're a big computer company. And IBM really never want to get into building personal computers. They never want to build a PC like you would have on our desks now. They kind of get into it because of their CEO in 1980, who's a guy called Frank Carey. And that top level quote, that first quote on that little bullet point there, "Where's my Apple?" was what Frank Carey said in a board meeting in IBM in 1980. He said, why don't we have, these things are starting to take off, like these Apple IIs, the Altairs, these, why haven't we got a product like that? And what he's actually told by the other board members is to just go away and buy Atari. And they're like, look, if you want one of those, just go and buy the whole of Atari as a company and just use them. But Carey opts not to do that. What he decides is he's going to get IBM to build a personal computer. And the story of how that comes to be is an entire story in itself. I won't go into it much here because it is a huge story in itself. But it involves a chap called Don Estridge. And Don Estridge has a good shout as being father of the PC, because he turns around and goes, okay, I'm going to take this challenge from Frank Carey, and I'm going to work out how I use off-the-shelf and publicly available parts, i.e. not stuff that IBM's made, because he can't get access to anything as IBM's made, because everyone else in IBM hates this idea and hates him and thinks it's a terrible idea, and they do not want to be coupled in any way to what they see as a project that's going to fail massively. And that gives Estridge the freedom to do what he thinks he needs to do. And what he does is ignore the IBM way He goes, we need to build this from available parts. We need to build it fast. We need to get something out on the market. And he also embraces this idea that actually Ed Roberts kind of came up with first, but Don Estridge, as an Altair owner, embraced. And that was this principle of what he called open architecture. And this was the idea that your machine should be upgradable. You know, we think about computers now where you can sit in there. If you've got a computer at home, if you're into PC gaming or anything like that, you've probably stuck a graphics card in at some point. You've added some extra memory. You've done those things. That graphics card and that memory will not be made almost certainly by the same company that made your computer. They're compatible. They're things you can put in. And this was the principle that Estridge wired into the PC from when it was made. He turned around and went, this machine should be upgradable. You should be able to slap things into it. You should be able to run whatever software on it, not just IBM software, and it should work. And that's how he built that machine and created it. It's also worth noting he was targeting business users, not home users. The home computer explosion that happens later in terms of PCs is actually largely driven by Compaq, not IBM. IBM never really care about the home market. From Don Estridge's perspective, the home market is for people like Jack Tramiel over at Commodore. It's for Atari. You don't go down to their level. You're not going to make a machine for $200. You're going to make a machine for $1,000, and you're going to sell it to accountants. You're going to sell it to architects. You're going to sell it to small businesses. So that's the market they're kind of aiming for and operating in. So the IBM PC is announced in July 1981. And to give you an idea of the scale of this, by the end of 1983, they'll have sold 750,000 machines. That's an insane amount of computers for the time. That's how many they've sold. At that point, they control an estimated 70% of the entire home and computing business markets with that machine. They've gone from not having any presence at all in a market that doesn't exist to just dominating it. It is why the word PC is now just in the same way as we might say Hoover for a vacuum cleaner. That's why we say PC. It is down to Don Estridge and down to that machine. And what he creates for IBM overnight is a monopoly market that they almost entirely control. Even though this is open architecture in theory and other people are making computers, why are you going to make a computer when everyone's just going to go out and buy an IBM? It's the name you buy. It'd be like going out now and again buying you wouldn't buy a non-NVIDIA graphics card. You wouldn't buy these things because they have become the controllers of these markets. And into that period come these companies that go, well, actually, this is open architecture. These are parts that are available on the open market. Why don't we just buy bits and build our own versions and get them out there? And hope we try and make it so they can run the same software, let's say run MS-DOS, which is the operating system that's running on these machines. And this becomes called PC clones. And a number of companies pop up that start to try and make these PC clones. And it's a great idea. But the issue that you tend to find if you're in that period buying a PC that's a clone is, in theory, the people selling it to you will tell you it will run every bit of software that you can run on a regular IBM PC. The reality is it will absolutely not run every bit of software that it will run on a regular PC. In metaphorical terms, you're almost buying the equivalent of a knockoff iPhone or a knockoff Android device. It'll probably run 80% of the stuff, but it might not run all of it. And so that uncertainty is the kind of the risk you pay for then getting a PC that's $200 cheaper or similar to like that. Now, that's the state of the market as we're heading into sort of 1981, 82. And into that come these guys. So you can see them on the screen there, looking absolutely dapper with the thing that they will eventually release. The people you're looking at there, seated at the desk, is Rod Canion. And behind him are Jim Harris and Bill Murto standing up. That's a picture of them in 1982. At the time, they were working at a company called Texas Instruments. So Texas Instruments were another early, big in calculators, big in chips. They'd kind of pivoted into doing some home computers. And actually, while at Texas Instruments, Rod Canion had led a project to develop a hard drive for Texas Instruments machines. He loved computers. The other two are into sales and marketing, and they also love computers. And by 1981, they've worked at Texas Instruments. They're making these products. They've been there for years. They're all in their 40s by this point. They've got families. this is how you would normally see them dressed. If you can imagine Silicon Valley here at the time, you're imagining your Steve Jobses and all of this kind of thing. It's very different from how these guys are. And actually, they noticed that. You know, as Jim Harris, you know, talks wonderfully about, he was having to go down to Silicon Valley to do these sales for TI chips and everything else to these nice Silicon Valley firms. And everyone's driving around in Ferraris. And he's rocking up in his beat up sort of Ford wagon based on his salary at TI. And he's going, why can't I have I don't want all of this, but can I just have a bit of this lifestyle? So they start to think about maybe they want to break out of TI on their own and do something for themselves, but they don't really know what they want to do. And they sit down round Rod Canion's table one evening and just throw around ideas of what they might do. Their actual biggest plan before they're landing on building a PC clone is they get halfway through planning to start a Mexican restaurant, because they all just love Mexican food and Tex-Mex and everything else. Like, yeah, like, let's just start a restaurant, man. Let's just do that. But eventually they realize that like their skill set probably means they should do something in tech. And also, I can't really imagine them in sombreros selling like food in a really dodgy Texas restaurant. So they decide they're going to build on Rod's previous skills, and they're going to make hard drives. They decide they're going to make hard drives for PCs. Because again, you can stick anything into these things. They can be a peripheral manufacturer. They can do this stuff. But they're not sure how to do it, and they don't have any money. So one day, Canion is in a meeting at Texas Instruments, and they have a consultant in. And that consultant is someone called Dr. Portia Isaacson. And Isaacson's ex-Army. She was discharged from the Army in 1962 and then worked as a programmer at Bell Helicopter. She then worked at Lockheed Martin. She went to Xerox PARC. In 1974, she gets an Altair and she is fascinated by it. And what she ends up doing is going off and setting up one of the very first computer distributor companies in America, and actually the first one in Texas. And she makes a fair bit of money doing that because she spots that wave of home computing is coming. She ends up selling that chain and just becomes almost a freelance consultant for decades afterwards. Quietly behind the scenes, she forms a lot of the theory of where computing is going and where big companies go with how they should do this stuff. And TI have hired her in 1981 to do a bunch of stuff. She's based in Texas. TI are based in Texas. These guys are in Texas. And one day when she's flying to one of their other sites, Canion gives her a lift because she hasn't got a car of her own. And in the car as they chat, he throws out that him and some mates are maybe thinking of forming a company, but they just don't know how to go about it or do it. As she described him, Rod was humble and soft-spoken with a gentle Texas lilt. His relaxed attitude always concealed a quick mind, and it contrasted with the brash and flamboyant personalities that dominated senior management at most tech firms at the time. I really liked him. He didn't overpromise on projects, he delivered. He didn't boast about his successes, he shared credit. And so she actually decides to take a bit of a punt because she's actually good mates with a person called LJ Sevin. And LJ Sevin is one of the original co-founders of a chip company called Mostech. They were a huge chip manufacturer in the period, and he'd actually sold it in 1979 for 345 million quid. That's about 1.5 billion today, if you're talking about it. And less than a month before that chat, before Canion had that chat with Portia, he'd actually teamed up with a New York technology analyst called Ben Rosen to launch a venture capital firm called Sevin Rosen. They will go on to fund so much of the tech startup world. Canion and Compaq are one of their earliest things. And as I asked Rod Canion once why he felt that Sevin decided to take a punt on funding him. And in his normal self-depreciating way, Rod said to me that he's pretty certain it was because they were both based in Texas and it meant they could do meetings and LJ didn't have to get on a plane. But so Sevin is also ex-Texas Instruments. So the two men get on, they start chatting, they've got a shared history. And that's what comes, and that's how Compaq forms. Because what Sevin tells them is he says, look, you're good guys. I want to back you to do whatever you want to do. But you need to make sure that when you leave Texas Instruments, the only things you take with you are your brains. If you take anything else, they are going to sue you into the ground. Like, this is how these big companies operate. If one of their employees goes off and works somewhere else or founds a firm, the big company is going to wait for them to do well, and they're going to come back to you, and then they are going to sue you for everything you just did and claim it as their own. And you're either going to have to pay them a massive amount of money, or you just have to give them everything. So Seven is the guy who turns around and makes them aware that they need to be very careful about how they go about founding their firm. And so on December the 4th, 1981, Canion and Harris resigned from Texas Instruments. And as per Seven's advice, the only thing they take with them is their brains. I think it's very example of America then and now that actually Murtaugh doesn't resign at that time. He actually resigns a few months later, and that's because his wife had just had a baby, and there was zero chance he was going to resign and lose his healthcare until that was all settled down, and she was clearly kind of in the postnatal recovery stage. But eventually he resigns as well. They're very excited. They're going to make their hard drives. They're going to do everything else. They're together a few days later when the phone rings, and it's Ben Rosen. And Rosen says that actually they're not going to back them to start a hard drive firm. They really like the guys, but they've asked around in New York and asked around in other funders to come in with them on founding the firm, and they can't find another backer. No one wants to back a hard drive firm for PCs at this time. But he does say to him, look, if you can come up with a different idea, you can come up with something else, we'll back you because we like you. We think you've got the chops, but you've got to give us something else. Now, actually, what they could have done at this point is just gone back to TI. They were very respected at Texas Instruments. And actually, TI kind of hinted at them, well, do you want to just retract your resignation? And they didn't. And I think it's often overlooked why they didn't. I asked Rod this once, and this is what he told me. I was perfectly happy doing fun work at a good company. And I have to say, what was the most important ingredient in leaving TI? It was probably because we got a boss that was just not good. We got a bad boss. He wasn't fun to work for. He wasn't a bad person, just not a good boss. I think there's a management lesson in there for anyone who is a manager or in any way, is that one of the ways you stop your brilliant employees going off and founding multi-billion-dollar computer firms instead of working for you is just be a better boss. But they're hunting around now for an idea on what to form. And one of the things that's happening at this time is this chap, this very dapper chap drinking his cup of tea, who is Adam Osborne. He is born to British parents living in India, in Tamil Nadu. He actually grows up on the ashram of Hindu sage Bhagavan Sri Ramani Maharishi, and Tamil is actually his first language. But he goes to school in Britain. He's British, comes across as British in America. He writes a book called The Value of Power in 1972, which is one of these first kind of tech tests. He is an iconic figure in that early tech period. He's there looking at that Altair and the first thing. He correctly predicts a whole bunch of stuff about how it's all going to be about telecoms and networking and all of this. But at the end of it, he decides eventually in about 1981, he wants to have a go at building his own computer as well. And so at the beginning of 1981, he goes to Lee Felsenstein, who was one of the other people on our slide earlier, and says, Lee, I want you to build a computer for me. And Lee goes, well, why would I build a computer for you? And Osborne was an incredibly charming man. So by the end of that conversation, Lee Felsenstein had agreed to build a computer for Adam Osborne. In return, he'd actually get a small salary, but actually 25% of the company. So, you can't really go too wrong with that. What they come up with is something called the Osborne One. And the Osborne One is a portable computer. And when I say portable, and we'll apply this to the Compaq portable that we'll talk about in a minute, it's portable in the sense that it weighs about the same as a 3-year-old child. We're not talking a laptop. We're not talking something you sit on a desk here. This is what they become known as luggables, because they are like an actual suitcase. But the benefit of them is they will fit under an airline seat. So if you're going between different places as a businessman, you can take them with you and you can go wherever you need to go. And this becomes hugely popular. The Osborne One, as it becomes known, is a massive, massive seller. But it's not an IBM compatible machine because it actually comes out before the IBM PC. And it's running a software called CPM as its underlying operating system and running business software on that. Again, there's a whole lecture to do on Adam Osborne and the rise and fall of that company. It's absolutely fascinating. But by this point, the Osborne is out there and it's everywhere. And it's really popular. And the IBM PC is out there and everywhere and it's really popular. So something goes off in Rod Canion's head. He says, I was struck by an idea that was so simple and obvious, it sent a chill down my spine. What if we could make a portable computer run the software written for an IBM PC? So he basically came up with what we would now call the idea for a laptop. He went, let's just take what Osborne did, and let's take what IBM are doing, and let's smash them together, and we now have a product. And that's where the idea for the Compaq Portable came from. And the actual instruction he gave to this image here is the actual first image ever drawn of what will go on to become the Compaq Portable. If you notice the frilly edges on it, that's because it's on the back of a table napkin, a table place mat. Because basically Harrison Canion met with a friend of theirs who was a retired industrial designer called Ted Papajohn. And remember I said about restaurants and how these guys love food? They're in the Houston House of Pies, which is one of their favorite restaurants. And they just started describing to Ted Papajohn what they wanted it to look like. And one of the things they said to him is, I need it to look like an Osborne 1, but a bit less army surplus. Because they're like, look, this business being going to have this. It's got to look classy. And Papajohn scrawled that on the back of a napkin, which I just love. That's effectively the very first picture of what will go on to become the Compaq Portable. They go back to Seven and Rosen and say, we want to build a portable IBM PC. And they said, well, no one's ever done that before. Are you guys sure you can do that? I'm like, yeah, we can do that. We reckon we can do it. And they've got the tech chops. And as Seven describes it, the first thing he said to them was that they said, what would it look like, whatever? They give him the napkin. Like that's literally at the back of their presentation is that actual napkin. And Seven looks at it and goes, I mean, pardon the language, you crazy bastards, okay. And that's how the Compaq Portable comes about. So to come up with this, they realized they need to do this. And if you remember what we were talking about earlier about not losing you only take your brain with you. The issue that they quickly realize is, and this is Canion's strategy, because Canion becomes the CEO of this firm. The other two take on marketing and production roles. Canion becomes the CEO. Their entire principle is there are other clones starting to pop up already, but we've talked about the problem with those clones, which is they don't run everything because everyone's trying to do their little bit. They go, it's like an IBM PC, but it's a bit better in this way. Canion's genius idea is he goes, we're not trying to be better. It has to be the same. It has to work exactly the same way as the IBM PC does. If you plug a thing in, it's got to be able to plug into exactly the same little chips and positions as the IBM one does, because that's then how it will work. Everything will just be compatible. But they're smart enough to know that the problem with that is you can't just copy it, because if you copy it, you're infringing their intellectual property rights. This is a thing that remarkably, an awful lot of the clone manufacturers don't really think about. But Canion talks about how, like, when they were starting to design this machine and getting it together, and they got the designers in the room, because a lot of guys from TI joined them. The work on this begins in about March 1982, because a bunch of TI employees joined them. This guy called Steve Ulrich, Ken Roberts, Steve Flanagan, Gary Steamach will turn up again in our story. They come and join, and Steamach remembers actually that they were told, these Canion and Co said, we could start in a computer firm. Do you want to join us? And they're like, yeah, cool. Now come down and hear us out. So they take them down to the warehouse they've hired in Texas, and it's just pizza everywhere, just fresh pizzas all over the tables, desks. Steinach says that they filled them full of pizza and Coke, and then sat down with them and said, we're going to build a PC clone that's portable. And everyone in that room went, no. And they went, yeah, no, we are. And he insists it was only because they were all full of Coke and pizza that they were like, yeah, okay, we'll give it a go, we'll join you. But they start this design work in March 1982, and they take this principle to heart, that this machine has to work exactly the same way as a PC. But they've also got to deliver a high quality product, because clones at this point have a reputation of being a bit cheap and plasticky, and they can't do everything. So Canion's big push is, we need our production lines to be perfect. This has to be what people perceive as IBM quality or better. And it also, as I say, has to be fully compatible from the BIOS to the operating system without infringing on IBM's patents. So the BIOS is the bit that sits on the board that runs, that kind of connects the stuff you connect to it to the machine itself, is probably the simplest way for those who are unfamiliar to describe how that works. But that means that they've got to make it work. And the person who's actually tasked with that to begin with is actually Gary Steamach, because that's his area of expertise. He flies to Dallas to buy a PC, which is actually harder than you'd think because these things are flying off the shelf. But he managed to buy one, and he returns triumphant. And he walks into the office and he says, look, lads, not only have I bought a PC, but it came with a manual. And that manual contains an entire technical breakdown of how the PC works. It's got all the diagram boards. It's got everything in it. I know how this thing works now. And he remembers Canion just groaning at him, because by looking at that manual, Steimach has now contaminated himself. He can't make their PC clone because IBM will just say, well, you copied it off of us. You read the manual. It's all in the manual. So this was a very clever thing that IBM did, because you did need to understand the technical specs if you wanted to build peripherals to plug into it. So everyone was like, this is brilliant. This is really good of IBM. As IBM would do for the next 15 years, they would regularly take down every single clone maker by just saying, did you read the manual? And if someone in the company said yes, 40 IBM lawyers walk into that room and walk out with your company. Like, that's how it works. So what they have to come up with is something called the clean room methodology. And the first thing they do is not fire Gary Steimach because he's very good and very clever. But they say that basically from that point onwards, anytime anyone buys a PC or anything like that in IBM, before they're even allowed to open the box, Gary's got at it. He's taken out the technical manual and he rips out all the pages that show how that machine works and then gives it back to them. And what he actually then do, and him and Canion come up with this as methodology, is they set up what's called the clean room approach. And how this works is Gary Steimach and a lawyer sit down in a room together. And Gary describes to the lawyer how the machine works. The lawyer, who's an IP lawyer, then translates that into a specification on how to build a thing. It must have 6 pins that connect to this thing to do whatever else, but writes that document in a way that does not infringe on IBM's personal IP law rights. That document is then given to a team who do not have any direct contact with Gary, and they go off and build something based on what he has just described, how that machine works. So if you've ever played a party game where you sit there and go, I'm going to draw a thing, and then you have to guess what that thing is, but you're putting someone in the middle, so you're describing that thing to someone. Like you're describing, someone over here is describing an elephant to me, and then I'm trying to write down a description of the elephant, and then someone over there has got to draw the exact same elephant I just described. That's how they have to do this whole process. It's painful, it's slow, but it works. And what they then do is they use trial and error to just iterate on what they're building to go, well, when I plug a thing into it, does it work? Does it not work? It's a fantastic approach. They pioneer it. And it will pay dividends later on that they did this approach. But one thing I always like to show is I'm always fascinated with how geek culture and nerd culture fits into modern culture and everything else. This entire process is fictionalized and described in a fantastic TV show called *Halt and Catch Fire*. It's well worth watching. If you're in the UK, it's actually on ITVX. You can just watch it all for free on ITVX if you don't mind adverts. But it describes a fictional company that is heavily based on Compaq at this period of creating a clone computer. On the left there is the TV version of the people who worked out how to do the clean room technique and do this. They look very cool, don't they? That on the right is the people that actually did it. It's a very different version of this. And that's not a dig at *Halt and Catch Fire*. *Halt and Catch Fire* is a brilliant TV show, but I'm always fascinated that I like that they make all of us nerds look cooler than we actually are. But one thing they also do very cleverly is Steve Flanagan, who's the guy who's leading the build process on this now. He runs into a bunch of IBM software guys at various PC conferences. And one thing he turns around to them at those things is makes it very clear that they're using this method to do it. Because he knows the longer they can stop IBM's lawyers coming after them, the more time they've got to get everything together, the product together, make some money so they can't just be shut down. So they do a very concerted effort to go almost, it's the whole metaphor about you don't have to be fast, you just have to run fast. You don't have to run faster than the bear, you just got to run faster than the slowest person who's also running from the bear. So IBM spend the next 4 or 5 years going after every other clone company, not after Compaq, because they suspect that Compaq will be harder to take down than the other companies. But this is what they come up with. It's the first true IBM compatible. It's released in March 1983. It's got an Intel 8088 processor. It's got a whopping 640 kilobytes of RAM if you really max it out. Ships with about 128K, but you can get it up to 640 if you really, really want to break the bank. It retails about $2,995, which is roughly about 10 grand today. That's how much you're paying for one of these at the time. It flies off the shelves. Absolutely flies off the shelves. They predicted sales of they ambitiously said if this goes well, we'll make about $30 million. They actually make in their first year off of this, they sell 53,000 units and they make over $100 million, which is equivalent to about 350 million quid today. It's an American business record. No American business has made that amount of money in their first year until Compaq comes along. They actually smash the record in their second year when they hit $329 million in revenue. So you're into your billions today. And in the third year, they're actually at 500 million. And that's another record. They just break records all the way through. It runs something called Compaq DOS, and we'll come back to that. But remember that the PC shipped and ran Microsoft DOS, and they needed something compatible. And so if you read the box, it would say it ran MS-DOS. It ran Microsoft DOS. It's actually running something called Compaq DOS, and we'll talk about that in a second. But before that, this is what it effectively creates. There is an entire tech industry in Texas now because of Compaq. Compaq, building on what Texas Instruments had still got there from their own time there, effectively created what became known as the Silicon Prairie. And it was this secondary thing that ran alongside Silicon Valley and is still a huge tech hub today. It's enormously positive, record sales, as we talked about. What you can see there actually is that's the 100,000th machine that came off the production line. And that's Rod Canion just going down to the production line, picking it up and giving it away to someone on the production line. The funny thing is that it turned out later that that wasn't the 100,000th machine. And the marketing department tried to take it back off of that guy. And Canion found out and fired the marketing people who tried to take it back. So that's not the Compaq way. Like, we gave that guy a computer, he gets a computer. We'll give me the other machine, we'll go give it to someone else. And that actually sums up their company approach, by the way. A lot of the employees you talk about there loved working at Compaq, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But one of the stories you hear a lot is they had no designated parking slots. So if you're a CEO, everything else, you know, like, I got my own parking spot really near the front. Didn't happen at Compaq. Their attitude was, if you get into work first, and, you know, apart from the disabled slots, you get to park nearest the office. You got there first. But also, people talk about, like, the Coke machines had free Coke in. You could just get free cans of Coke. And other companies weren't doing that. And when the Coke machines ran out periodically, and if the Coke wasn't available to fill them up, the employees remember, like, Harris and Murto and Canion would occasionally just be seen going out in their cars and just going down to 7-Eleven and just stocking up with giant bags of cans of Coke and bringing them back and putting them on tables in the background and going, sorry guys, Coke machine guy can't get it for another week. Just shout us if we need more Coke. That's the kind of attitude they had at Compaq. But what they're doing really is filling a gap that IBM aren't filling. IBM don't have a portable computer. Compaq are filling that gap. And that's why they're doing so well. And we talked a bit earlier about what Compaq DOS is. So when, again, without going massively into detail on it, Bill Gates and Microsoft give IBM MS-DOS practically for free. They give it on the deal that they can sell it to the PC clone firms. And because IBM don't think this is going to be a market, they just stupidly agree to it. So effectively, Microsoft are now double dipping. Their software is on IBM PCs, but they're selling it to the clone manufacturers as Microsoft DOS and saying this is the exact same software. And that's what's been happening and starting to happen as this goes on. It's Steinmatch who spots that what Microsoft are selling as an exact copy of IBM PC DOS is not an exact copy of IBM PC DOS. When you try and run certain bits of software on it, they don't run. And a lot of the other clone manufacturers have put this down to their own technology and their platforms being different. It's not true. The reason it doesn't run is because MS-DOS is definitely different from PC-DOS, which is the stuff that Microsoft are making for IBM. And Canion actually confronts Bill Gates about this. He goes and visits him and says, Bill, we think you're lying and that this software is not the same as that software. That operating system is not the same as that operating system. And Gates actually laughs and says, yeah, no, you're right, it isn't the same, it isn't the same thing. And so Canion says, well, can you sell me exactly what you're selling IBM? And Gates says, okay, let me ask my lawyers. He goes off and asks his lawyers. And he comes back to Canion and he says, when we set up PC-DOS for IBM, we forked in software terms, and we went MS-DOS is on that side and that's development arm, PC-DOS is that side and that development arm. And the deal we have with IBM is the same people can't work on the same bits of software. So what happens is they build PC-DOS, and then whoever's on the MS-DOS team looks at that and tries to copy the functionality. And that's why they're similar, but very slightly different. He says, I cannot sell you PC-DOS. That is exclusive to IBM. My lawyers cannot break that deal. He says, I can tell you the exact version number of the version of MS-DOS where that split happened. And if you were to license MS-DOS and ask for that specific version and then do your own thing with it, that would be entirely legal. So that's what they do. Canion specifically licensed that specific version of DOS before that fork, and then he puts in place his own DOS development team in Compaq under Gary Steamach to develop out their own version of MS-DOS. This is known as Compaq DOS, and it's what ships with every Compaq machine. And their version is, again, because they're building the platform to test it on, they're very quickly able to get a version of Microsoft DOS that is much closer to the PC version shipping than anyone else knows. And even the other clone companies don't know this is going on. They don't know that that's what Compaq have done. So all's going well up until late 1983, which is when IBM at this point are going, hang on, Compaq's making an awful lot of money selling a portable version of an IBM PC. We should probably make a portable version of an IBM PC. And so they announce, or rumors start to surface in late 1983, and they're true, that IBM are working on their own portable. This is a moment of absolute crisis for Compaq, because Compaq is entirely dependent on cash flow from sales. And what happens when IBM say they're going to release a portable computer is everyone who is on the verge, all the big businesses that were on the verge of buying a Compaq portable computer, now go, well, we're not going to, we're going to wait and see what the IBM one's like. Because why would we buy a Compaq knockoff if we can just buy the actual one from IBM? And it's, as Canion describes it, was one of the few times where I've had to say there's no successful path out of this. Unless something is wrong with their product, we're screwed. So we're going to keep building. And the keep building is important because if any of you have been following tech news today, or even this week, you'll know that there's a massive RAM crisis going on because AI firms have already pre-bought every single bit of RAM under order for this year, for their big new data centers to do everything else, because stuff is sold in advance. Compaq have exactly the same problem with Intel chips in 1983. If Compaq turn around and go, actually, we're going to not make any more machines, we're going to hold off making machines and see if our version can still sell, they're going to lose their reserved slots for all of those Intel chips. And one of IBM's common tactics was to just snap up every single available chip that Intel were making, because then they could stop other people being able to buy Intel chips to make computers. So if Compaq had given up on that capacity, they're not getting it back, not for 6 months to a year. And at this time, that's just deadly. So they decide they're going to keep making Compaq machines, Compaq portables, even though they're not able to sell them. Dealers are not taking them on. They're not wanting to distribute them. They make so many of them because they're keeping the production lines up that they actually run out of places to store them in their warehouses in Texas. But what they can't do is let people know that they're stocking up all these machines, because it will cause a bigger crisis in terms of the company's finances, and because they're about to try and float on the stock exchange. So what they actually start doing is they start hiding them in truck trailers all around Houston. So if you walked around Houston in about January 1984, you'd have seen an awful lot of trucks parked up in random car parks all the way around Houston. Every single one of those trucks was full of Compaq portable PCs because they'd run out of storage space. Now, luckily, what happens, and actually this is just a quick thing here, is I won't read this whole quote out, but it'll be there for people who want to do it later, is what Canion's really good at is as a manager. And throughout this whole crisis, he makes sure he's telling the people internally what's happening. So people make mistakes when they don't know what's going on, when they don't know all the facts. The more they can be aware of the whole picture, they're much less likely they are to make a mistake. So the more I could tell them about what we were trying to do, our plan, then when they saw something that didn't fit with that, they could raise their hand. The reason they know not to stop producing computers is because when this comes up as a chat in a lower level management meeting, that this is their plan, that this is the crisis they've got to deal with, a very junior production manager puts his hand up and says, if we stop making, we're going to lose our chip slots. And that filters back up. And that's why they carry on producing computers. If they hadn't kept the staff informed of what they were doing, the management would not have known that, and they'd have made a terrible choice. Luckily for them, in February 1984, IBM finally revealed the specifications of the IBM Portable. And it's heavier, it's less powerful, and it's slower than the Compaq Portable. They've kind of half-assed it. They've just gone, we're IBM, everyone's going to buy it anyway. And people don't. Instead, what actually happens is orders for Compaq Portables soar, because now effectively IBM have said portable computers are a thing. And everyone then in their company can go to their boss and say, we should get a portable computer. And then they go, well, we'll be buying the IBM machine. They go, no, we're not buying the IBM machine because Compaq machine's better. And all those semi-trucks that are sitting there with all this vast cargo of unsold Compaq portable PCs are now rolling out to every distributor in the US. And Compaq actually have their biggest year on record by doing that. The other reason that people buy Compaq is because Compaq, by this way, they've come up with this thing that we now take as just standard, but it was revolutionary at the time, which is this: backwards compatibility matters. If I buy a new PC now, I expect my 12-year-old version of Europa Universalis 4 to run on that machine. I expect Steam to run on that machine. I want my old software to work on that machine. IBM didn't care. To give an example, when IBM revealed their portable, it wasn't fully compatible with all existing IBM PC software. They based it on their XT chipset, which is an iteration of their initial PC chipset, which software didn't work with. The software wasn't cheap at this time. If you're an accounting firm and you've just dropped 20 grand on software for your new IBM PCs, and then you buy a new computer and none of that software works on it, you're not just having to buy the computer, you're having to buy all the software again. And that assumes that those software makers have already made the software work on the new version of the PC, which was not guaranteed. And this worked in Canion's and Compaq's favor, because they were the first company to go, every single time we release a new clone, even if it won't work on the newest version of the IBM PC, it'll work on the newest version of ours. And this is a concept they take all the way through. And the other thing is that, of course, Compaq and IBM, Compaq had always worked on the basis that as long as they didn't fish in IBM's pond, IBM wouldn't fish in theirs. We'll make portables, you make desktops. The moment IBM announced a portable, Compaq go, well, the gloves are off now, lads. And what they release is that. They start working on this, and it's released in June 1984. This is the Desk Pro. This is the first IBM desktop computer. And as with everything Compaq have made so far, it runs everything that an IBM PC has been able to run since the beginning, which IBM's machines being released at this time absolutely do not do. It's better. IBM released that August, they released the PC AT, which uses a 286 chip, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But a big thing that Desk Pro has, and all Compaqs have in this, is they come up with their own custom effectively equivalent with a modern graphics card. And what that actually allows you to do is switch between what they call at the time HD, which is not HD by modern standards, and SD graphics. And really what that breaks to is this running in 3 colors or is this running in 32 colors? But they come up with a specific way of doing that in a way that doesn't slow the machine down. It means their machines are consistently faster than IBM PCs because they're not throwing as much processing into doing graphics. And this is what they release. So the IBM kind of go forward and they go, right, well, we're going to beat Compaq now by releasing the first 286. And this is a chip iteration. So they've iterated the chip up now. So they're releasing a faster chip in this, the 286. And they can do this. And this really emphasized that IBM have a bit of a lock on the chip market because they are Intel's biggest customer. And so IBM are the people that Intel, when IBM say to Intel, we want X amount of your chip capacity, Intel go, yes, boss, we will give you that chip capacity. When Intel wants to develop a new chip, they go to IBM and say, we want to develop a new chip. And IBM go, well, that's fine. We will pay for X percentage of the development to develop that chip. They have a symbiotic relationship at this point. This is a very powerful computer. It is more powerful than the Desk Pro. But the problem is it also still completely sits with IBM's philosophy, which is backwards compatibility is for cowards. Absolutely no previous IBM software released or software released for an IBM compatible machine will work on their new 286. Compaq released an updated version of the Desk Pro a few months later, which is a 286, and it runs all that software. So people buy Compaqs. So all this time, IBM still had the dominant market share, but Compaq are just eating into this by just going, we kind of care about you as customers in a way that IBM doesn't. IBM just wants you buying computers. We're happy enough in our tech platform that we can build you something that will run all of the stuff you had before. So this situation, though, is what bothers Canion and others is that chip situation is always a problem they're not going to be able to unlock because Intel and IBM have such a close relationship that they're always going to get those chips later than IBM do. And as Canion describes it, he remembers having a meeting in early 1986 where they talked about this and said, we're always going to be chasing after IBM. That's just the nature of this. We're never going to catch them because of that chip relationship. I think it's Murto says the only way that would end is if IBM did something very silly. In 1986, IBM did something very silly. This is the 386, which is the newer version of the chip. This is the first time really you start getting computers where your little desktop computer is powerful enough to do the kind of things that up until that point you needed an IBM computer about that big to do. So that what we call mini computers. So IBM would sell you a computer for the equivalent, the modern equivalent of about 60 grand today that would do a bunch of complex things. The 386 is the first desktop computer chip that's fast enough to really do a bunch of that stuff. Intel announced to IBM and say in 1980, end of 1985, they go to IBM and say, we reckon we can make this chip now. And it's going to be amazing because it makes desktop computers as powerful as mini computers. And IBM go, what the hell, man? Absolutely don't do that. We like making and selling mini computers for ridiculous amounts of money. We're not going to back you and pay for your 386 development. And Intel can't develop that chip on their own because they need a manufacturer to cover the cost. Because the first runs of all of those chips are not going to work, or they might not work, and it might need completely retooling, and that's expensive. And that's what's going to be called making risk wafers, which is literally these wafers full of chips where none of them might work, and that might continue for ages. You don't know how long that's going to continue for. And so previously, IBM had covered the cost of that. In January 1986, Hugh Barnes, who's one of Compaq's lead engineers, he comes to Canion and he says, I've got a really weird piece of gossip I've heard. Because Barnes worked really closely with the engineering team at Intel. And he's the one who says, IBM have turned down the offer to develop this 386 chip. So Canion picks up the phone and he calls Andy Grove, who's Intel's president, because the two have met at conferences and everything else. And Canion says to him, says, I hear IBM don't want to build your new chip. And Andy Grove's surprised that he knows this and says, yeah, I mean, that is it. So sorry, we can't give you 386s yet. You know, like when that chip's ready and IBM have done the thing, obviously we'll get it to you and all of that. Canion says, we'll pay for your risk wafers. Do it with us instead. And the two men by this point have good enough relationship, and the reputation that Compaq's engineering team have built up by this point is enough that if any other clone company had come to Intel and said, we'll cover that, Intel would have laughed them out the building, because you need such a level of technical expertise to be able to do this, that previously IBM were the only company that could ever provide that, and IBM knew that. Compaq now have enough tech people that they can do this, and so they agree to do that, which is how you get this. Released in September 1986, this is the Desk Pro 386. It is the first ever 386 computer, and IBM are absolutely caught out by it, because they go, where did that come from? We haven't made a 386 chip with Intel yet. And Andy Groves says, yeah, no, so we went and asked Compaq if they'd do it, and they did it with us instead. Comes with a massive 1 megabyte of RAM. You can actually get it up to 16 megabytes of RAM if you really want to overclock it. But it runs a 386 chip. And that's announced actually on September the 9th, 1986, with Rod Canion and Gordon Moore, who's the legendary president of Intel, just sat, and the press are like, wait, you've done it, but IBM haven't done a 386 yet. And yeah, well, we have. There you go. It's the first time that duopoly between Intel and IBM is broken. And so this really is the moment where IBM really take notice. And what they really decide to do at this point is this whole open architecture thing that allows everyone to go off and clone their machines and do everything else is not a good thing overall for them. They're not really keen on it anymore. Now, Estridge, who'd started the PC and founded this, that had been his big philosophy. His philosophy had always been, we don't care if people copy us because we will always be better. The problem was that IBM had fallen into the trap of going, we don't need to be good because we're IBM. And that philosophy clash had resulted in this situation. So what IBM do, and the chap who's now in charge of this at this point is a guy called Bill Lowe. We met him at the beginning. And actually, Bill Lowe was the very first person to come up with a test version of the PC for Frank Carey, but he then handed over the project to Don Estridge, who'd taken it to the end it went to. Bill Lowe was seen as a bit of a firefighter and a fixer within IBM. He's an incredibly good manager. Like, I don't want to put him down in any way, really, really good. But what he also was is a member of something called the mainframe mafia within IBM. And these were the guys who came from the big computer arm, who'd always hated the little desktop PC arm. And his theory was, you do everything in-house. This was the mainframe attitude. Why are we using Intel chips for this? We should be using IBM chips for this. We have our own chip plants. Why aren't we doing that? Why are we letting all these clone companies make things that are clones of our machines? We need to get back the intellectual property rights and control of this whole market. So what I actually come up with is decide to move and completely move away from using the same technology platform that everyone else is using. And they introduced this thing which is called the PS2. It is not a PlayStation 2. It is the IBM PS2. And the fact that PS2 now is now better known for PlayStation tells you everything about how long that machine lasts. But they build this on something called the microchannel. And the microchannel is a proprietary 16-bit, 32-bit parallel computer bus, the bit that stuff plugs into. It's fully IBM proprietary technology. If you want to use this, you're going to have to license it from IBM, and IBM are going to charge you enough money to make sure you damn well can't beat them on price. And if they think you're a rival in any way, they're just going to cut off your licensing. But people try and work out how they can clone this, and you probably can with a lot of effort, but no one's really got the money to go to that effort. And Mike Swavely, who was then Compaq's vice president of sales, again, apologies for language, but my first reaction when I saw the announcement of the PS2 was, oh, shit. As far as the business press is concerned, as far as the computer industry is concerned, IBM have just pulled back. Ooh, we've just lost a screen in here. Back. I've just pulled the market entirely under every other clone company, and they brought it back to IBM, because you cannot beat IBM. This is the standard business philosophy. Everyone who has tried, no one ever got fired for buying an IBM. This whole thing is taken away. And actually what happens is the other clone companies, including people like HP and Dell, who've popped up by this point, and all the other ones, they start quietly doing licensing deals with IBM. People who don't are Compaq. And this is what they decide to do instead. In an all-hands meeting in Houston in January 1988, Canion stands up in front of all of Compaq's engineers and he makes an announcement. He says there will be no more doffing the cap to IBM. Compaq will defend the existing standard. What they say is, we're not going to try and clone this. The existing standard is fine. If we develop the standard out, it will work. And we're going to just make sure that that carries on going the way it is. He says they will create a micro-channel rival based on the existing architecture. And then he tells everyone in that room that they're going to give it to every other clone maker out there for free. That's how they're going to beat IBM, is they're going to create the new standard and they're just going to give it away to everyone. It'll cost them $60 million to create this eventually, if not more, and they give it away. And I asked him once why he did that. And this was his answer. It hit me at some point. We're the only ones that can do this. If we don't, it won't happen. We have to build the standard and maintain it. And to some degree, we have to give the company jewels to our competitors. And in the end, we gave them everything. I'm sure IBM never imagined anyone would ever do that. It was 180 degrees from their business philosophy. It would go on to show that Canion had worked out how you beat IBM, which is you just do the exact opposite of what IBM does. But you need the money and you need the strength to do it. But leading a rebellion is one thing. Getting other people to sign on board is really, really hard. And what Canion and Compaq realized is they needed to get enough people on board to beat this. And there were two key people, three key companies that they needed on board. The first of them was Microsoft. Remember that Microsoft are making the operating systems for all of this stuff at this point. And Canion knows that Gates is an enormously powerful man in the computing industry. And if you can get Microsoft on board with their rebellion that's brewing, then it's got a chance. Now, anyone who is familiar with Microsoft and Bill Gates, I always joke that I'm pretty certain that Rod Canion is the only person in the computer industry that Bill Gates has not screwed over. And there's a reason for that. They became good friends. But if you remember earlier, I talked about Compaq DOS and how Compaq started making their own version of Microsoft DOS for their own machines. In late 1982, Canion answers the phone to an angry and panicking Bill Gates. And Gates says, "Are you going into the operating system business?" And Canion says, "No. What do you mean?" It turns out that whilst the other clone companies haven't really spotted that Compaq DOS is more compatible with PCs than MS-DOS is, the kind of people who are sat in this room or listening online now have. Word has got around. People are going to dealerships and they're not, rather than buying a Compaq computer, they're just buying a copy of Compaq DOS because it's better than what Microsoft is selling. And Gates is now panicking because Compaq's version is better than what his internal people are making. And now what Canion could have done at that point was go, well, sucks to be you. This is a new revenue stream for us. He doesn't. He actually does something extraordinary. And most people still don't know this ever happened. I only know it because Canion told me and then I did the digging. Canion agreed to stop selling Compaq DOS as an entirely separate product and instead licensed it back to Microsoft. Every version of MS-DOS that was sold after the end of 1982 was actually Compaq DOS rebadged as MS-DOS on a 3-month development delay, so that Compaq's version was always more compatible than their rivals. So Compaq would make their version of DOS. They would wait 3 months and then give it to Microsoft. Microsoft would then slap the new badge on it and sell it to everyone else. This continued from the late 1982 all the way through the lifespan of MS-DOS. So that was fantastic for Bill Gates because he just canned his entire Microsoft DOS development team, but he still charged everyone the same price. So Canion and Gates had a stronger relationship than anyone at IBM knew. And by this time, actually, what's happening at Microsoft is having problems because Bill, though, if you remember, I said he's a mainframe guy. He wants everything in-house. He's very much not happy with Microsoft's deal that allows him to sell software to IBM competitors. So what he's effectively doing at that time is trying to bully Microsoft into giving up that deal. And actually, they're also starting to develop something called OS2, and starting to develop things together. And all of this is effectively IBM trying to go, we want to take back control of our operating system. Microsoft are working with them because they're almost a kind of captive part of this process. But it means that when Canion comes to Bill and says, we're thinking of rebelling against IBM, Bill goes, I'm in. IBM don't know this. None of this is in any way leaks back to IBM at this point, which I think tells you the testament of the relationship these people have. And it's Gates that starts doing work for Canion on Path, speaking to other people and saying who you need to get in. Canion goes to Intel, says the same thing, speaks to Andy Grove. Grove says, well, look, you work with us on 386, and IBM are now threatening to make all of their own chips in-house for PS2. Yeah, we're in. We'll join you. Canion now has the chip maker. He has the operating system manufacturer. What he needs is the other clone manufacturers. And most specifically, he needs HP. The only other company that's making machines in any presence in the market to a similar level to Compaq, and it's much smaller, it's about half the amount of computers clones in the market. But the other big company in the clone space is Hewlett Packard. So, but Canion has no in with Hewlett Packard. They don't know each other. They obviously don't talk to each other. But Gates does. So Gates is the person who actually gets Canion through the door at HP. And what he does is Gates kind of persuades HP's president, you need to listen to Compaq, have something they need to tell you, and you need to listen. And it's actually Hugh Barnes, who we talked about earlier, and Gary Steamach, who are sent down to HP and tell them this idea. We're going to do this entire rival to the IBM product. We can do everything else. And HP like, sounds great. There's no way you're going to give us all of that info. And they just literally put binders on the table and go, there you go, it's there. You can have it now. Even before we've signed the deal, even before anyone's contracted anything, that's our way of showing that we're serious about this. There you go. And their tech people just pour over these binders. They look at it, they go through it, they go, yeah, there's actually, this can be done. And they report that back up the chain. And the result of that is a few days later, HP President Robert Puente rings Canion personally. And this is the slightly edited version of what Puente says to Canion. And again, apologies for language. Don't fuck us, Rod. Don't fuck us the same way we've all been fucked by IBM. Swear me a personal oath right here, right now, that you won't fuck us and we're in. Canion swears the oath, and HP joined the rebellion. This is just a quote from an interview actually I saw with him. This is why Canion did it. He says it's so important that we risk the company to keep them from winning, because we saw it. Every other company, Dell, HP, everybody had licensed the PS2. You have to imagine this in a really nice, light Texas lilt, by the way, because that's how Canion speaks. They were rushing to be the first with the PS2. They were going to be the Compaq of the PS2 world. Well, that was a dead-end street. What's your reward for that? You get to live longer than everyone else and still die. The net result is this, the Gang of Nine. This is the press conference that Canion had called that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, was to announce the formation of the Gang of Nine. IBM had no idea it was happening until the morning before Bill Lowe gave Canion that call, because that's how secret and how clever they've been in keeping this together. What they announced at that press conference was they were going to create something called the ESA standard, which was this developed out standard, which is exactly as I say, it's backwards compatible, which IBM's version, shocker, wasn't. And he's got 9 major companies, all the key companies are signed up, 40 more sign up. Dell actually don't sign up straight away because Dell at the time had a Ryanair of computing. The moment this announcement goes out and it starts to get a bit of press, Dell are on board because now they know it's serious. It's demonstrably equivalent with IBM's offering. And they can do it because they've got the market share. Effectively, by this point, IBM are controlling roughly about 34% of the PC market. That's how much Compaq has eaten into their market. Compaq have 28% of that market by this point. That's how much they've eaten into IBM's share already. Now, the reason Bill Lowe knows about it and makes the call to make that offer that Rod Canion turns around, is because Canion tells him. Canion leaves a message for him that morning and says, we're going to do this. And by the way, we're announcing this rival for you in a few days. And Canion does that because he said it's the fair thing to do. He said, I felt it wouldn't be fair if we didn't invite IBM to be part of our rebellion against IBM. So he was like, but it's the fair thing. If we're creating an industry standard, we can't say we're creating it, but this is an no IBM's club. We have to give them the opportunity to be part of this standard. So that's the first time IBM find out that this whole thing is about to happen. And that's what triggers Bill Lowe's offer to basically split the industry with Compaq, because he knows that if he can split Compaq off from the rest of them, Canion's the leader of this. Canion is the hinge point that everyone else trusts. No one in this entire rebellion trusts each other. Bill Gates does not trust Poete. The Dell guys do not trust HP. No one, the only people everyone trusts to keep their word is Rod Canion. And that's what happens. What you see there is actually a photo from the announcement thing. That's Steve Ballmer. It's the Intel guy in the middle, whose name I can never remember. But he's in the middle, and Albert Yu. And then you've got Rod Canion on the side there. IBM's reaction to this is, I mean, I probably wouldn't describe it as measured. IBM immediately turned around and sued Compaq for patent infringement. They send in the lawyers. They send in heaps and heaps and heaps of lawyers. This is where what we talked about before comes into play. All that clean room stuff that Compaq have always done saves them, and it saves this new industry standard. David Cabello, who's Compaq's in-house IP lawyer, he has to carry out discovery when all of these guys come in. It's the only time I've ever seen an IP lawyer smile is when you describe that exercise of discovery, because what he discovered when they were doing it was that actually, yes, Compaq had accidentally infringed on some of IBM's patents as part of this process. IBM had done the same thing to Compaq. They'd accidentally infringed on a bunch of theirs. So the only thing that could come out of it really was a mutual agreement deal. And that's what happened. So in late 1989, IBM and Compaq agreed a cross-licensing patent agreement. Cost Compaq a one-off $130 million fee. From Compaq's perspective, that's the best deal they've ever made. And in return, that means Compaq won't sue IBM back for their own patent infringements on everything else. Now, this isn't a guaranteed process at this. Everyone still thinks IBM is going to win, but what Canion and Compaq do very well is they manage to PR better. They really push backwards compatibility as a thing. They pushed at its equivalent chip values, and it works. And actually, Canion comes up with a phrase that really catches on. He describes the new microbus as the new Coke of computing. Now, at the time, Coke had just released a new flavor version, which had absolutely gone down awfully in the general market. Like, everyone hated the taste of it. So they had to go back to doing their old recipe again. And by describing it as the new Coke, it just, all the news channels, everything latched. They had now an easy metaphor for describing what the difference was between the two. That I've seen in IBM archives reams of PR documents where they're desperately spending so much money to try and get this new Coke reference out of the media, but it just doesn't work. And so momentum's building. But there is one final hurdle that stands in the way, which is, and it's a bit like, again, our RAM crisis now. They need to show that it can work with the newer chips and everything that's coming out. And obviously the 486 chip is now in development. Intel are working on the 486. But IBM put Intel under pressure, and Intel are coming under pressure as well from their rivals at Sun. That everyone is talking about RISC computing, which is this new way of doing computer chip development and everything else. It's going to be the future, same way as AI is the future. It's going to be the big future on this everything. And Intel start to pivot most of their chip production over and throw a lot of resource behind that rather than the 486 chip. And again, it's Hugh Barnes that gets the sniff of this because he's the one who's working with Intel constantly. And he starts noticing that all their top engineers are being reassigned onto the RISC side. Effectively, in March 1989, Bill Gates and Canion meet Andy Grove in a hotel room and basically bully him into carrying on the Intel 486 development. Because they say, if you don't do this, you're losing the entire PC market. I know you think that the better thing to do is to pivot most of your production away and maybe delay the release of that chip. We need it now because we need to be able to demonstrate our industry standard will work with it, not just IBM stuff. So there's a little bit of dirty tricks going on from the IBM behind the scenes about this. But actually, and I quite like this, I mentioned this at lunch earlier with some of the guys, is that what you're looking at there is the very first ever computer to ship and sell with a 486 chip. It's neither an IBM machine nor a Compaq machine. That is absolutely, I think it's an Apricot. Yeah, it's the Apricot VXFT, made in Scotland. First 2 units for that were shipped, and I've only just found this out, and I'm desperately trying to find out where they were based. So the first sale of this was in December 1989, and they delivered 2 units to the offices of Fuel Oils Limited in London. Cost about 14 grand in 1989, which is about 50 grand today. But so the very first ever 486s in the world were actually made in Scotland, and they were shipped there. IBM released one shortly after. Compaq and the other chip companies released after that. But the point was, it demonstrated that relationship was broken, that it would hold, that the new architecture could support 486s, it would be good, it would be fine, and everything else. And that ultimately is what happens over the next few years. By 91, you're in a position where IBM they're keeping going with their PS2 arm, but they're the only ones on it. No one's licensing it off of them now. No one's making those clones off of them. They're just continuing on the other standard. So you have these 2 parallel standards running. And IBM are just losing market share because, again, backwards compatibility is actually what companies care about more than they care about whether their computer's a PS2 or a PC. And yeah, by 1991, this is pretty much clear. It kind of 5 years really before IBM finally admit defeat. 1995 is when they quietly can the entire PS2 line, and they finally stop making them, and it actually continues on for a little bit longer than that. The last thing that's running that same microbus chipset and everything else is if you ever owned a ThinkPad. ThinkPads were running that chipset right up until, I think, 2004. So they were completely on a different architecture, and they were doing a lot of stuff on top to then run the software to do whatever else. Right up until they sold the entire PC arm to Lenovo. They were running PS2 in some variant, near enough up to the end of that period. That tells you the legacy of the market. IBM exited the market entirely in 2004. By that point, they didn't have a market share. So I like this quote because I think it sums up after it. And again, it's something Rod said to me, is there's no reason to assume. I put it to him and said, like you were the only person who could have done this, to pull those relationships together. Like when I've looked through the archives, I said, I'm going to put it to you, Rod, that you are the only person who could have done this. And he kind of reluctantly admitted that, and that kind of sums up the man he is. There's no reason to assume someone else would have done it if we hadn't. Well, that's true, I guess, because there wasn't any other company or any other person. I mean, as the leader of Compaq, yeah, I suppose I had to make this life or death decision for all of us. I genuinely can't think of many other people who would have said no to that answer to that Bill Lowe call. I wouldn't. Why would you? Arguably, he was doing his shareholders a dirty on it and could have been prosecuted because he was thinking about the industry, not the company. What happens after that? I mean, the founders depart. Bill Murtaugh actually retires in 1987 to spend more time with his family. Canion's actually forced out by Rosen in 1991. 1991 is the first year Compaq don't post record profits. And Rosen, as chair, had become dissatisfied with how Compaq was being run. Because Compaq under Canion had this focus on quality and on doing things right. And by that point, you've got Dell starting to eat into the market. You've got these kind of things. And Rosen has become convinced, rightly or wrongly, that the future is in budget PCs. Canion's argument was always that you can't compete with the lowest common denominator. If you compete only on the low, if the only thing you're competing on is price, there will always be someone who can do something cheaper than you. The two men started to clash. Canion himself admits he was very tired by that point. And effectively, that's where it kind of starts to go bad in that relationship. Rosen tries to elevate a guy called Eckhard Pfeiffer to become, who's one of Compaq's vice presidents, who's very close to become the co-CEO. And Canion says, I'm not, no, either I'm the leader here or I'm not. And so Harris remembers, like, they were getting ready for a board meeting, and he says, Rod came over to him and said, Jim, they're going to vote today on whether to remove me. And they board voted Canion out. Canion said, that's fair enough. I'm tired. I'm off. Harris resigned immediately after. And yeah, Compaq refocuses down on the lower end PC market. It works for a while. Good chance that if you were like me, a kid who was getting their first PC in 1992, 93, good chance it might be a Compaq Presario. Really good machines, very cheap. But they're really good machines because they're a legacy of the production processes that have been created when they were making quality machines. You jump forward to 96, 97, that institutional memory has been lost, and there's nothing really at that point to differentiate a Compaq machine from a Dell machine that you can buy actually by that point, increasingly actually online direct and not go via a dealer. I think this is a very telling quote someone told me. They were a former Compaq employee. When Canion left, she said it was like the heart and soul of the company being torn out. That was what the feeling was within Compaq itself. And I think a lot of that comes from, just to finish off this, what I call the Compaq way, which they demonstrated all the way through, which is this is how they operated as a firm. You know, the principle that people work for people. It was always about knowing people. It was always about visiting the production lines, doing things. The things we talk about, that discussion is collective, but then decision is singular. Use a committee process to get all the info, but accept that someone has to make the decision. The committee cannot make the decision, you know. Don't blame, learn. Think back to Gary Steamach mucking up reading the technical manual. They could have just fired Gary at that point and gone, let's get someone else in. They didn't. They went, how do we turn this to our advantage? Don't be afraid to do it yourself. They did that with their chips. They did that with Compaq DOS. Communicate openly, honestly. We saw that in terms of learning that if they'd stopped production of their machines, they'd have not been able to resume it. And build relationships, not rivalries. You don't get the Gang of Nine if Compaq hadn't been building relationships, not rivalries. If some of this stuff sounds familiar, I've noticed in all of my studies, this is a bit of a trend in the companies in this period that do really, really well and succeed. On the far left here, if you saw my talk on Laurie Harp, and again, yeah, it's up on YouTube, this is exactly the same principles she operates at Vector Graphic when they come to dominate the business market before IBM show up. The branch of IBM that beats them is the one led by Don Estridge in the middle there, who has this exact same philosophy, but just has the resources of IBM behind him. The man next to him is Rod Canion, who beats effectively IBM. He beats them because the reason Bill Lowe is in charge of, or one of the reasons why Bill Lowe is in charge of IBM's PC arm by that point is because Don Estridge had died in a plane crash. Now, you can argue that Estridge might have been on the way out because IBM were already trying to force him out because of their big computing attitude. What's a hypothetical is once they realized they were losing, they may well have brought him back in, and they didn't have that option because he was dead. And finally, just someone I'm going to be doing some research about in a while when I get moved into doing chip research, but that's actually Jerry Sanders on the end, who's founder of AMD. He's ex-Fairchild Semiconductor. He goes off, he becomes one of the founding partners in AMD. He has a very similar philosophy. That's why they're dominant now in terms of, you see them now, they're a chip rival to Intel. They're the only other real player in that market. One of his defining things in the 70s is he absolutely refuses to do mass layoffs. When every other firm is shedding people in recessions and stagnations and everything else, he absolutely refuses to fire anyone off of his chip lines and everything else. He says, if we fire those people, that's knowledge we're not getting back. We're just on a death spiral at that point. We have to find ways of keeping them employed. I'd rather go into massive debt and keep them on, and the whole company maybe not come through it and fail, than do this ridiculous downsizing exercises. And then just my final quote for today is, before questions, is, I think this is very telling of Canion. He's done this with me. I've heard him do it with various people he chats to. He's on LinkedIn. Drop him a message. He's still around with us. He'll happily talk to you. If you ask him what he's most proud of, and remember, this is a man who genuinely has a good claim to say he beat IBM and founded the PC market as we know it. Without him, you don't get the PC market. You don't get those clones. You don't get those machines that can carry on being everywhere. It's those machines that kill Commodore because they become the machines on our desktops at home. None of that, the success of Dell, the machines we run on now, even though they're now on different architecture, PCI is the thing that comes in and eventually replaces ESA. That principle of backwards compatibility, the principle that this stuff should work together, is now so wired into the industry, and not just the PC industry, but beyond, that the phone revolution is built off of that. But this is what Canion will say if you ask him what's he's most proudest of his entire career. He'll say, and so this to me is, people still write into me today and say Compaq was the best place they ever worked. Why, that means a lot to me. It just makes my day. I think that sums up that leadership, but also why him being right place, right time is probably why we have a bit of an industry that we have now. And yeah, I mean, that's it really. Happy to answer any questions, but also that's where you'll find me. And actually, this is the first time I'm going to announce this. You guys get to hear it first. Is as of today, as of about an hour ago, I now have a history podcast I've just launched, which is called the Untitled History Podcast. That QR code will take you to the first couple of episodes of it. Literally, you are the first people in the world to know that now. But yeah, hopefully that was interesting. And yeah, happy to take questions. I should say as well before questions that absolutely I will be in the nearest pub in about once questions is over, and I'm more than happy to carry on answering questions at that point as well. But yeah, in the room or online, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I don't have anything online just yet, but I see there's questions in the room. So
yeah, I mean, if you tell me a question, what I'll then do is paraphrase it and repeat it back so that people online can hear it.
This is a very layperson's question, so I didn't quite understand what you were saying. Probably obvious sort of sorry, just great talk. I say firstly, you said that PC was like Hoover. So was that actually a brand name that IBM used, the personal computer? Was it trademarked?
It was effectively what they came out with, and they called it the personal computer. So it's a really good example. So the question was IBM was PC what specifically IBM came up with, and did they trademark it? It was actually called during development the Acorn, because they were launching it as a rival product to the Apple. So that was their in-joke. When they launched it, yeah, PC was what they were then calling at that point a personal computer, the IBM personal computer. The press and industry then abbreviated that to PC. And I think it's actually a really good example of how IBM lost control of the market without thinking about they were losing control of the market. These days, if you were doing that, you would absolutely go out there and copyright that as a term. I've not done the research into actually as allegedly a similar thing. And I'm saying allegedly here because half the time these stories turn out to be false, and this is not one I've been able to debunk yet. This is why you get the chip jump from 486 to Pentium. One of the reasons for it, because there's an element of 586 isn't copyrightable, whereas Pentium is. Yeah, so they don't trademark it. And as with the open architecture, there's elements of that open architecture that in reality, if they had really clamped down on the firms really quickly at the time, they could have driven them out of business at that point. But by the time they realize they need to do that, it's only the most egregious examples of copying that they can still go after, because everything else has become industry standard by that point, so they just wouldn't win in court. So yeah, should they have trademarked it? Yes. Did they trademark it? No.
On the back of that PC, Apple had Apple PCs. The personal computer was a personal computer, whichever manufacturer.
Yeah, and so just comment in the room to say that, yeah, like Apple were calling theirs a personal computer. Yeah, they absolutely were. And IBM are the first people to use it with capital letters. And that's the point where you could have just, yeah, they could have done something and they didn't. But yeah, it's a really good example of how because they didn't, IBM always hated having a PC division. It was a huge amount of their income, but the mainframe mafia, as they were called, they controlled the senior positions. And it was always about, we want to build big computers, not small computers. And by the time they realized that was their cash cow, they'd ignored it for too long. And that's why they did the PS2, to try and bring that market back under their control. Because then they can go, microchannel is trademarked. PS2 is trademarked. You cannot use these phrases. You cannot then claim it's a PC compatible, because you're going to have to say it's a microchannel compatible. If you want to say that, we're going to charge you for using the word microchannel. You know.
great story and really well told. Thank you very much. Obviously, Rob Canion got lots right, maybe everything right. But it does occur to me that maybe the VC guy, was it Rosen or something, actually was right. I mean, I've worked for big companies who were completely happy buying Dell because it was the cheapest thing that would work nearly all the time. It was compatible with each other, you know, it's very easy to install. And it became a sort of lowest common denominator, but not the very lowest, but it was the lowest common denominator that worked. And that would have, I think, you know, maybe he was right.
Yeah. I mean, there's question. So the question in the room is there an argument for saying Ben Rosen was right? I think if you turn around to Canion, Canion would say that there is an argument for saying that Ben Rosen was right. That at that point in the market, if Compaq wanted to continue at an exponential growth level, then the only way to do it was to move downstream. Now, there's another talk to probably do on the fall of Compaq, which I wouldn't even want to do at the moment because I'm still actually doing a research and a lot of chatting to the guys who are there and doing all that, and I'm hoping to do a lot more on that this year. There is an argument for saying that it was never, the issue was never that they were internally, Compaq wasn't worried about doing the low end. What they were, the debate was as much that Canion was, we have to carry on trying to do some of the high end as well. And whereas Rosen was absolutely convinced that the only future was in low end. And what they didn't then he didn't anticipate, none of them anticipated, because you can't predict this stuff, is that actually in the future, things like server tech was going to be really important and really loud. How you make a server to go in a server rack is going to turn out to be a really powerful market that you can be in. And when Compaq tried to get into that market, once that turned up, by that point, they'd lost that internal technical base to be able to get into that market. So the only market they could play in by that point was the same market that, as you say, Dell were playing in. And Dell are a fascinating company in that, because as I say, like I do often describe them as the Ryanair of computing.
Tesco.
Yeah, the Tesco maybe, but I mean, their owner was very Ryanair. But yeah, I think it was more that Rosen felt that there was only one path they could go down, and others thought we maybe should go down that path, but we need to keep a finger in other paths. And I do agree with you. I think it's very dangerous to look back with hindsight and go, this is where the world went, and people were wrong to make the decisions. I think based on the decisions they had at the time, frankly, if you spoke to Canion about it today, he'd turn around and say, actually, it made sense what Rosen wanted to do. It didn't turn out to be the right thing, but none of us knew what would have been the right thing.
Question online from Vince asking, why did Compaq take over DEC? You can comment on that.
Why did Compaq take over DEC? That is one that goes into my future talk on the fall of Compaq, because it's a really, really good question. And part of it in very short terms was about trying to get feet into markets outside of basic PC, in part because of where they felt gaps were starting to occur because they'd let people go, and because big company wants to eat other companies. There were internal forces at the time that said they absolutely shouldn't be by DEC, and there were others that said we are like IBM now, we should eat people. So there's a whole other talk to do on that. It's a genuinely good question: is why did IBM buy DEC? There's a bunch of others they do. You can also similarly in that same bracket is the eternal why did they merge with HP? Ultimately, HP and Compaq merge. In fact, really, HP buys Compaq. They buy what's left of Compaq and wire it in. Yeah, perhaps in future, fall of Compaq is one maybe that's one for the future. Yep.
I'm just going to wonder if it wasn't for Compaq, maybe the world would have gone a different direction. Maybe Linux or these added.
Yeah. So the question is, if it wasn't for Compaq, does the world go in a different direction? I think it does. I think you've got to again be very careful about doing hypotheticals. But I think what you can do is look at the fork in the road and go, what were the other options at the fork in the road point? And the options are that everyone goes onto PS2, and what you then get is we probably still get the level of tech that the world goes down. But what we do is we get it at a far slower pace, because you're then into a world where IBM really are controlling when they want stuff released. And as we have evidenced from the 386 release, IBM's when do we release a new chip, when do we push chip technology, was always going to be based on how is it going to impact our sale of big computers to big firms. So what they're not going to do and would never have done is push for the 486 chip to be released, because they didn't even want the 386 chip released. They want another year before the 386 comes out. So if you go down the PS2 path, what you're probably looking at is everything that happens still happens, but it happens at a far slower pace. And maybe we're not at the level we are now in terms of, particularly with mobile phone technology and what comes out of ARM and all this kind of stuff, maybe we don't end up with the level of devices we're at now because we're on a very more slow path of progression. The other side of it, yes, is does it lead to a point where alternate operating systems or alternate setups such as Linux or even Apple get more of a market share? I suspect that is the other alternative, is what even within that world of slower tech progression, what you maybe end up with is a bit of a forking more on the high end level of tech is forced to go far more down that open source or an Apple route. Because if you want the access to the newer bits, the newer ways of doing things, you're going to have to be on that path. But again, you then come back to how much of chip development is driven by IBM. What you maybe do get is Sun microcomputers being far more powerful because they were Intel's big rival and they're the only people who can really out-chip them at this time. So maybe it gives Sun an opportunity to become the new Intel. Maybe that's the alternate dimension version of me is up here giving a talk on how Sun became the new Intel. So yeah, there are paths untraveled. I think we can't know. What we can know for certain is we absolutely would not got the pace of development and the pace of progression to everyone having a computer on their desk at home. If we didn't have this, now your real hypothetical, your pub hypothetical is what does that mean for Commodore? What does that mean for Atari? Because they were the people that were filling that computer on a desk or computer under a TV gap until this happened and Compaq and HP and Dell ate away all of that market. Maybe we're all still running. And as someone who owned one, I would be overjoyed by this. Maybe I'm now sitting there with an Amiga laptop, not a Commodore Amiga laptop, not a PC compatible laptop.
Another question online from Rob Schofield, who asks, was the ESA bus regarded as a success overall?
Was the ESA bus regarded as a success overall? It was regarded as success in the sense that it demonstrated that microchannel was unnecessary. It lasts as a platform for about, I think about 8 years before PCI just takes it away. So was it a revolutionary platform that was going to permanently change how people looked at computing? No, because ultimately what it was saying the status quo is fine. The status quo is fine for now in tech terms, but what we're really doing is making a point, which is to say that the philosophy is what matters, not the technology. So it's a holding pattern that allows the industry to go, whatever comes next shouldn't really be, even if someone wants to do something proprietary after this, the shot has been fired to say that if someone tries to do that and restrict access to it, the rest of the industry can gather together and slap them down. So I would argue that from a business, from a philosophical perspective, and from a business strategy perspective, it's an enormous success. If you looked at it purely as a technology, it's comparable to microbus. There are some things the microchannel is actually better on. What it comes down to really though is they don't matter. A lot of it comes down to this talk about moving from 16-bit to 32-bit. And actually a lot of it is turning around and going, most companies don't need stuff at that point that's running on 32-bit buses. They're just fine on 16 and all of this. So technical platform, it's okay. It does the job. As a statement on not locking down the industry, it does exactly what all of that gang of 9 needed it to do.
Another question from Emilio, who asks, well, first of all, he congratulates you on an excellent talk and asks if you can say anything briefly about Compaq's PDA, the iPack from about 2000.
The iPack from 2000. I can tell you that I actually had an iPack, courtesy of some work I did for various people. I will be bluntly honest and say, to hand, I can't say much about it. What I can say is in the early bits of research I've done already, it's another example of Compaq actually having some smart ideas as they got towards the end of it, as where do we go in different directions, but really suffering from that element of going that we don't really have the internal technical leadership now to be able to really exploit those different gaps and where we can get into. And that's the bit they kind of lose when they kind of strip back and go a bit leaner and a bit more basic. They were always really, from the beginning, they were the best way to think of them was a clone plus. That was always the ethos they were founded on. We're going to clone, but we're going to know what we're cloning, and we're going to know why it works. By the time they're trying to do everything, and from sort of 98 onwards, they're only really capable of copying, or even if they have a good idea, not really having enough internal technical chops to push it forward. And again, like we can argue that, yeah, like could anyone have foreseen that? Maybe not. Like it's not necessarily a bad decision.
Why was OS2 such a disaster?
Why was OS2 such a disaster? That is a 3-talk series. Yeah, the very simple and honest answer on OS2 on OS2 is it was a disaster because Bill Gates wanted to make Windows, and IBM wanted to make something entirely proprietary, and those two things were never reconcilable. Particularly once this split happened, and once Bill Gates sided with Compaq. The reality is the way that OS2 could have worked and been better is if IBM had actually cut the exact same deal with Microsoft that they'd cut originally and said, yeah, we'll build it with you, but you can sell a version for cheap to the client. You can make money off the version you're selling to the other companies. Lowe and subsequent and prior to him, senior people within the entry-level systems division, which was the PC arm at the time, they just could not mentally deal with that. So you just had this hugely antagonistic relationship between Microsoft and IBM all the way through the mid to late 80s and early into the 90s. And so it was a really nasty relationship whilst they're still both having to work on the same product. But yeah, there's whole talks in that. But yeah, that's the short version. Is effectively you need to both be pulling in the same direction to build the thing that you want to build. If both of you are pulling apart, you can't build something for the future. Yep.
I realised this would be a whole other lecture, but was Apple paying attention to what to Compaq taking on IBM, or they were just doing their own thing?
Was Apple paying attention or doing their own thing? Apple was really doing their own thing. I think a thing to emphasize with all of this is, especially at this period, the real focus for this, for Compaq and then for IBM and all of this is we're still not in these selling computers to go on desks at home stage. And they're not really trying to sell computers to get into, say, design companies or high-end stuff like that, or advertising agencies. You're selling those computers to get onto an accountant's desk or to get onto an insurance salesman's desk. And that's a profoundly uncool market that, generally speaking, did not require a machine that Apple were offering. So if you're buying Apple at this point, you're buying a glamour product. It's very good. It's top end of market, but we're in this period where Compaq are really delivering that they're delivering the IBM compatible bit. Dell are offering you a cheapish PC. So it's only really once both down the line, this becomes important once you hit the mid 90s and the early 90s, because by that point, you're getting those PCs from various companies that arguably can compete with Apple desktops. And that's when Apple eventually has to bring back in Steve Jobs, and how do you revitalize it, and how do you turn it back into a product again? My one fact I'll give you on that is, the fun thing on that is Don Estridge, who we talked about earlier, is head of IBM. When he loses control, when IBM boot him out of control of the entry-level systems division due to internal politics, Steve Jobs asks him to take over everything at Apple. He asks him to become Apple's new CEO. And Estridge turns it down. He says, my blood runs blue. And he's happier to stay on as a vice president as IBM, almost in waiting for when they will need him again. And unfortunately, he dies in a plane crash. But the thing I'll say about that is I can't remember who comes in to replace Steve Jobs at Apple. But eventually, I think he comes from Pepsi, and then he's when he's eventually booted out, it's because Apple's share price collapses based on a lack of confidence in him. The person who collapses that share price is a certain Steve Jobs, because he literally offloads a whole chunk of his shares via brokers, so nobody knows it's him. And then, of course, Apple turned to him to appoint him to save and stabilize the company. It's the biggest, dirtiest hit job anyone has ever done on a CEO, but which, like, fair play to him. Like, he wanted control back. That's how he got control back. But yeah, so back to the original question, they're playing in kind of different fields at this point.
A question from Tim Lyons online, who asked if you could comment on the fact that now it seems to be only the IBM compatible market that actually cares at all about backwards compatibility.
Yeah, now it's the only the IBM compatible market that cares about it. Yeah, I mean, it's the other thing with that is that Apple never really cared about it and never wanted to be part of it. Jobs was always very anti making their platform open. Yeah, but I think that's a legacy of Compaq again. It's now so wired into the industry that everything must be backwards compatible, that everything must be at least in some way linkable, everything is intertwined. That is a legacy of this moment. And back to the earlier question about, does this affect Apple? It doesn't. And so Apple never really has that coming to, you know, getting that vision of needing to do that. They become their own thing. And so, yeah, I do think this is a moment that ripples on today. Now, whether it'll ripple on forever is another question. And the question I leave that open for everyone to think about is, if we hit another moment in this industry, is there anyone in this industry who says no when that offer comes through on the phone now? And I think that's a open and perhaps scary thing to think about. Would a CEO even be allowed to say no in that situation now, given obligations to shareholders and all that kind of thing?
Eric Bodger has mused online that OS2 could have been compatible with the Windows interface, but IBM thought they could do it better. We couldn't.
Yeah, 100%. Honestly, like, I mean, if anyone, my email address is on the screen. If you've got stories about OS2 and this period, email me, get in touch. I'm always happy to interview people and do things, because I do want to work on that overall. And it is, yeah, it's a fascinating story, that. And a lot of it comes down also to difference in software development processes and how they develop software. And frankly, a lot of times IBM are right and Microsoft is wrong. But Microsoft way is faster and works, whereas the IBM is slower and better for the long term. And you get this clash, particularly at a time in the industry when everyone needs to move fast. I mean, every now and again when I write these articles or on the book I'm working on, I'm chatting to the editor about it, and she'll turn around to me and say, like, you haven't said what year this is happening in? No, we've gone through 5 different chip iterations or whatever else, and you haven't said what year it's happening in. And I said, no, it's the same year. It's still, we've gone through, the industry's moved on in this progress, and everything we talked about in the last 3 chapters was January through to February. Like, we've not even moved beyond February yet. But there was a question there first, I think.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting was you're talking about the person on the right in your rogues gallery being part of Fairchild. But if you go back, I mean, right to the beginning, Shockley went off to set up his own hardware company and was an absolute disaster, because he might have been quite clever in some ways, but he's a rotten businessman. But the people he chose were very good. They went to Fairchild, and then some of them went to found Intel. So you've actually got, you know, the people from the very beginning of the modern electronics working their way through into this story. Yeah,
so in the room it's talking about how you get this progression, right, with Shockley and Fairchild, and you get almost this cycle of people being very smart and good, but not necessarily being great managers. And when they do set up a thing, they might hire good people, but then eventually those people end up turning around and absolutely loathing them and going off and doing their own thing. And someone once told me that the entire modern computing industry is built on everyone eventually hating each other. And I think that's probably fair, is that you get these cycles of everyone enjoys working with someone for a while and then everyone hates each other. The corollary he added to that was, but also eventually also liking each other again once they're not working with each other. So you get like the pedal-Trammell relationship is a fascinating one over the years. But yeah, I think, but it's also why I like to highlight, as I did at the end there, that what you do consistently see is the people who are people-focused and empathetic and focus on, let's get the smart people into the right positions, but let's not necessarily assume that's the leadership position, because management is a skill and tech is a skill. And if you've got someone who can do both, that's amazing, but most people can't. that's when it goes right. Again, Osborne's the classic example of that, about how that all goes catastrophically wrong, and a lot of that is down to him. But yeah, so yeah, I think it is a thing, and again, it's why, you know, our people on the screen there, I think those are from this period. The four that stand out are the ones who, almost because they learn that actually the people matter. But if they'd stayed in charge, I mean, Laurie Hart had no chance because Estridge ate her market. Estridge is gone. That allows Canion to eat that market. Some of this is inevitable change, but yeah. Again, as I always say to people, look for where those leaders are in this industry today, because those are the interesting people. Those are the people who in 20 years' time will be looking back and going, they were the defining people at the moment. Won't necessarily be the people who are out there fronting giant sales of AI chips at the moment.
Just to add to that particular point, do you think that you're ever going to get a group of people like that again? Because what's happening now is everybody goes and does an MBA and they all think it the same way.
Yeah, the question, do we think we're going to get people like that again? I think people didn't think at the time that people like that existed at various points. I genuinely think it's in 20 years' time, we might be in this room talking about a bunch of people who are doing computers now who aren't even people that we know about or only peripherally know about in the press. And it will turn out they were the ones who managed things and behind the scenes. They might not be the people who are shouting the loudest at the moment. So I like to be hopeful. I think there are quiet leaders in this industry. I think there's some serious figures around that are quietly leading in interesting ways. And I think there's various people who, as world events progress, become very obviously not those people. But yeah, who knows? We will see. But yeah.
Well, actually, a couple of things, if I may. The first thing on the way in, I was listening to BBC Sounds podcast called Good Bad Billionaire, and it was about Larry Ellison and how he made his billions. Completely different character. I used to work for Oracle, declared this, and it wasn't a particularly nice place to work. But you know, certainly made huge success. I was actually going to come back to the thing on OS2 because it's quite interesting. I was a software engineer at the time, and my background was in DEC computers, back to BMS, and I believe the architect of BMS, what was he called? Went on to develop OS2.
Yeah, I remember. I know who you mean. Yeah, as
so
architect
I really liked it, and I was very disappointed when this horrible MS-DOS thing won out. But it just shows that the engineering side of it doesn't really, you know, it's not what makes these things happen. It's these alliances and the marketing and things like that.
I think that's it. So to pick up on the 2 points, the second one there is about like OS2 was actually quite good, but by the time it was actually usable, it was pretty damn good. The problem was it was far too late by that point because everyone's already using everything else, Windows 95 and beyond. The first point actually is, as a good counterexample is yes, Larry Ellison at Oracle. Fascinating figure in various ways. It's similar to Jack Tramiel. There are people you can turn around and go, I can see why you succeeded. You were brilliant at it. There are reasons why you were the person you were, but ultimately you weren't necessarily the nicest person. One of the things I will say on that is that I took great joy, obviously, TikTok, in the US element of TikTok is now owned by Oracle. And that almost failed on day one. And I did facetiously post on BlueSky at the time to say, I take great joy as an older techie in seeing Gen Z discover how awful Oracle is, you know, for themselves, because effectively it's like this moment of empathy where you go, yeah, no, your product doesn't work now. Yeah, no, that's welcome to the world of wait till they license it by CP cores rather than the CPU cores at you, you know. I mean, this whole era is fascinating. It's full of fascinating characters. I try and focus on some of the ones that we don't really talk about a lot because actually they are quietly influential.
So Mike Perry online has commented that ironically the latest IBM mainframe will run software that was written for the 360 unmodified.
Yeah, I think weirdly IBM were always better on compatibility on their mainframe side than they were on their PC side, because ultimately that's where the bucks were. And ultimately, if a company's paid you 70 million to develop an entire system for them, then you care about backwards compatibility. What you don't care about is if you flogged a machine to someone for $700. It's almost that equivalent of the if you owed a bank 100,000, you have a problem. If you owed a bank 100 million, the bank has a problem. And I think that was always very much the case with IBM, is that they never liked having their PC ARM because, oh God, we've got to do backwards compatibility for these guys. But you look at the budget line, they haven't given us that much money individually. It didn't matter that they were the third largest company in the world if you spun them off. Everyone's looking at and going, why am I going to give someone I've sold a machine to for $700 the same level of support I'm going to give someone I've sold a machine to for $700,000? Because one of those has contributed massively to my end of year sales bonus or account management bonus. And the other one as an individual is worth nothing to me. So yeah, that ethos always goes through in the middle of IBM, is they were always better at supporting their large business company customers. What they never clocked was that you needed to extend that to your other end as well. Or you needed to go down the Dell route and say, actually, we're just not going to do any of that. But you know what you're getting for. It's going to be good enough. It's going to survive. Just don't ask us for aftercare because it's just absolutely not happening. Yeah.
Sorry, coming back to IBM, always playing that. Having had a foot in both GSD and DP camps, if you bought a 360 for lots and lots of money, you ended up having a glass of wine at the Archduke. If you bought an IBM 36 for not that much money, you ended up being taken for a pint in Doggett's Coat and Bank.
Yeah, so this is yeah. This is if you bought an IBM 360, you're getting a glass of wine in a posh place. If you buy an IBM 36, you're getting a pint in Doggett's. Yeah, but they were always honest about that. And I don't have a particular anti-IBM thing. I just find it that they never wanted to be in the PC market, and I always find it fascinating that what you do now is what they ended up doing eventually was, once it was successful, once it was dying out, they spun it off to Lenovo. They sold the whole thing off. Realistically, if that happened today, that's probably something that would have happened sooner. So they'd have done the equivalent in, say, 1985 of just selling the whole thing to another big player. But the reality is, in that point, there isn't another big player to sell it to. Today, there would be. Today, you'd have an entire, if nothing else, a venture capitalist arm, entire private equity arm that would just buy it en masse and then drive it into the ground. But they would buy it. IBM, I think, would quite happily have offloaded their entire PC arm far earlier if they'd had the choice. But the only person you could sell it to is, by that point, is Compaq, and Compaq, like, no thanks, we've already got one. You know, they're the French guys in the castle in Monty Python. I think we already have a Grail. You know, we don't need one. You know, it's that.
Well, thank you very much, Gareth. That was absolutely fascinating. Just the level of engagement, I think, shows that. The number of questions. There's plenty of comments here, which I won't read out all of them, just people congratulating you on the excellent talk. One commenter says it was the best presentation he's heard for a very long time. So,
well, thanks to everyone for listening. And what I would say again is to reiterate, if you're in the room, I will be in the pub for at least a pint or two. But also that one of the reasons I enjoy doing talks here and do encourage people from online who've only just joined for this one is because the joy of doing it for the CCS is you give us the time to do this properly. This is a talk I've had to do a 20-minute version of before. I'll let you imagine how hard it is to get all of this into 20 minutes.
There's already a couple of people anticipating your talk on the fall of Compaq, by the way, so you've got to get on and write that. So thank you once again, Gareth. And the next Computer Conservation Society talk will be on March the 19th, and our speaker will be Derek Jones. And the subject he's talking on is computer performance between 1953 and 1993. So I hope you'll all be able to join us for that. Thank you very much.